Hey YouTube, it's your favorite apostate, the Apostacat, once again exposing those Watchtower inconsistencies and freeing you from the prison of your little old mind. Now, for the purpose of this discussion, we're going,
Apostacat? Those are my lines. Jeez. See, he's trying to steal the show. I swear. You know, that Apostacat, it seems like he gets just that much bolder every day. I don't know what to do sometimes. In any event, the purpose of this discussion would seemingly be minor to most people, but in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, this actually will pan out to be something major, and is something major in our understanding of the two distinct halves of the Bible. And that issue, namely, is this, which is the issue of categorization. I can never get that word quite right, but you understand what I mean. It's interesting to note that most of society will categorize the two distinct halves of the Bible as the Old Testament and then the New Testament. However, Jehovah's Witnesses deviate from this standard, and they consider the first half of the Bible to be the Hebrew Scriptures, the second half of the Bible to be the Greek Scriptures. And why is it so important that they choose to do this? What could possibly be the motive? Well, I think it's probably best if we turn to what the Watchtower itself has to say on the matter. And this can be found in the 9/1/2007 issue of the Watchtower, and it's the box on page 6. It says this: the expression Old Testament is found at 2 Corinthians 3 and verse 14 in the King James Version. In that rendering, testament represents the Greek word Di-a-thek'e. However, many modern translations, such as the New International Version, render Di-a-thek'e as covenant rather than testament. Why? Lexicographer Edward Robinson stated, since the ancient covenant is contained in the Mosaic books, Di-a-thek'e is put for the book of the covenant, the Mosaic writings, i.e., the law. At 2 Corinthians 3:14, the Apostle Paul was referring to the Mosaic law, which is only a part of the pre-Christian scriptures. What then is a more fitting term for the 39 books of the Holy Bible? Rather than implying that this part of the Bible was outdated or old, Jesus Christ and his followers refer to these texts as the Scriptures and the Holy Scriptures. Therefore, in harmony with these inspired utterances, Jehovah's Witnesses refer to the Old Testament as the Hebrew Scriptures, because that portion of the Bible was originally written mainly in Hebrew. Similarly, they refer to the so-called New Testament as the Greek Scriptures, for the Greek language was used by men who were inspired by God to write that portion of the Bible. Okay, now addressing that. It is very true that Jesus referred to that text as the Holy Scriptures, or simply the Scriptures. But to understand why, one must consider the historical context of why he did that. First and foremost, the New Covenant had not yet been instituted, because the New Covenant hinged upon Jesus' faithful course of action and then the sacrifice of his blood. So there was no New Covenant at the time that Jesus would be saying these things. And also, one must consider who he was talking to. Generally speaking, the audience deferred to the books of Moses, and the other books of the Bible, such as the minor prophets, were disregarded or not held in so much importance. So Jesus would often refer to the writings of Moses to support his arguments or to show the Pharisees or his audience where they were wrong on a subject, because it was these scriptures that they respected. Now, and also the last point would be that there were no Greek scriptures at the time of Jesus having uttered those words, because there was no Matthew, Mark, Luke, and there hadn't been written any, so that's pretty simple. It's not really incorrect to refer to the first 39 books of the Bible as old. And why do I say this? Well, I'm going to give you several scriptural reasons that I use to back this up. Primarily, I defer to the teachings of Jesus, and Jesus stated that he was instituting a new covenant. Now remember, for there to be a new covenant, there would have to be an old one as well. In any event, Jesus said this at Luke 22 and verses 19 and 20. He said, also he took a loaf, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them, saying, this means my body, which is to be given in your behalf. Keep doing this in remembrance of me. Also the cup in the same way, after they had the evening meal, he saying, this cup means a new covenant by virtue of my blood, which is poured out on your behalf. Now, Some translations, just like the King James Version or the NIV, will render that word covenant as testament. And the same Greek word used in Corinthians is used here. That word Di-a-thek'e is translated in Strong's Greek Dictionary as this. It's called rendered a disposition, arrangement of any sort, which one wishes to be valid. The last disposition which one makes of his earthly possession after his death, a testament or will. Number 2 is a compact, a covenant, or a testament, such as God's covenant with Noah, etc. So we see here that in the case of the Greek language, the words testament and covenant can be interchangeable. They mean the same thing. But that's, the scripture that we just read there in Luke 22:19 and 20 is not conclusive. And remember, for there to be a new covenant, there must also be an old covenant. And we come to a more clear understanding of this actually in Jeremiah 31 and 32. And Jehovah's own prophet is used to foretell this coming of a new covenant that would wipe away I'll just read the scripture. The scripture, Jeremiah 31 and 32, says this: "Look, their days coming is the utterance of Jehovah, and I will conclude with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah a new covenant, not like the covenant that I concluded with their forefathers in the day of my taking hold their hand to bring them forth out of the land of Egypt, which covenant of mine they themselves broke, although I myself had husbandly ownership of them," is the utterance of Jehovah. So we see there in that book that this new covenant is not going to be like the one that he concluded, past tense, with the forefathers, which I guess by virtue of that would be past tense, in the past, of Israel. So this new covenant is going to be simply that, new. And the old covenant would be passing away. And let's see, the Bible sometimes can be likened metaphorically to this giant legal argument. And I know the Watchtower loves to use that metaphor very frequently, so we'll stick to that. Now, anybody knows that when a party breaks a contractual obligation, on the part of the contract writer, that gives them the distinct privilege of being able to write a new contract if the contractee does not live up to his end of the bargain. And clearly, as stated in that scripture there, they did not, or that which covenant of mine they themselves broke. So Jehovah in this instance has every right to institute a new covenant, which would be wiping away the old covenant. Now, why do I use that term, wiping away, or maybe even invalidating, although I'm not sure that's quite the correct word? Well, we'll turn to this last scripture, which I believe is fairly conclusive, and it's found in Hebrews 8 and verses 7 to 13. It says, "For if that first covenant had been faultless," so see the first, then there's a second, right? Old, new. You see the distinction there? "For if that first covenant had been faultless, no place would have been sought for a second. For he does find fault with the people when he says, 'Look, there are days coming, says Jehovah, and I will conclude with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah a new covenant.'" That word Di-a-thek'e is used again. "Not according to the covenant that I made with their forefathers in the day of my taking hold of their hand to bring them forth out of the land of Egypt, because they did not continue in my covenant, so that I stopped caring for them, says Jehovah. For this is the covenant that I shall covenant with the house of Israel after those days, says Jehovah. I will put my laws in their mind, and in their hearts I shall write them. And I will become their God, and they themselves will become my people. And they will by no means teach each one his fellow citizen, and each one his brother, saying, Know Jehovah. For they will all know me, from the least one to the greatest one of them. For I shall be merciful to their unrighteous deeds, and I shall by no means call their sins to mind anymore. In his saying, a new covenant, he has made the former one, what? The former one obsolete. Now that which is made obsolete and growing old is near to vanishing away. Again, one must consider the historical context. Pre-Christian Jews did in fact believe in a paradise earth that they would be raised to. So it's curious then, after the death of Jesus Christ, that belief is totally switched over and is changed to the more modern iteration of Christian beliefs that we understand, which is faithful servants will be going to heaven. Now that's not quite where I want to take this discussion, but you see why it's very important that we understand the Old Covenant is very different from the New Covenant or the New Testament. And it's also interesting to know, and that's the point, why would the Watchtower make such an issue of this? The only scripture which directly states that there will be people residing forever upon the earth is in Psalms 37 and verse 29. Now, if that is to remain true, then this scripture, this dirty little scripture here in Hebrews chapter 8, where it says, in his saying a new covenant, he has made the former one obsolete, they have to wipe that one away. And they have to rig the vernacular of Christians, or witnesses, I should say, to believe that there is no such differentiation between the two halves of the Bible. Now, that doesn't make it necessarily invalid or unrespectable, because one can respect the Roman Empire, although one is not a Roman citizen, and the Roman Empire has passed. So the teachings within are obviously they still have a bearing, and most of them still align with our, modern understanding of Christianity. I mean, obviously, Jesus wasn't advocating stealing or murdering, but we're no longer under that law. I hope I'm making this clear. So this new covenant that Jesus instituted, he very simply says this in John chapter 6 and verse 53 and 54. Accordingly, Jesus said to them, most truly I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves. He that feeds on my flesh and drinks of my blood has everlasting life, and I shall resurrect him in the last day. Now, I don't know about you, but I would most certainly like to be part of that new covenant, and I would like to follow the teachings of Jesus that we find in the New Testament. I hope that this video was at least somewhat helpful, and I hope that my point is clear. And, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses, if you have a different understanding and you would like to refute me using the Bible, I'm more than happy to hear your thoughts. Remember, life is a state of mind.